Welcome to our Appalachian journey. This journey took us back through geological time to learn how the Appalachian Mountains were formed, and to understand how time and the forces of nature have shaped this landscape. How these mountains, rich with natural resources, were valued by humans for their beauty and bounty, as well for their potential for resource extraction such as coal and timber. This journey has helped us see how these mountains have shaped the lives and communities of the people who live here. Through our partnership with Slow Food Asheville's Food Story Bank, we have breathed life into learning about the history of Appalachia by collecting stories from people in our community who have lived connected to this landscape. Specifically, we ask questions about food and farming practices, as these food pathways offer us important insight about daily rhythms, family life, values, skills, and tools that existed in early Appalachia and today.
Stick that in there and pull it. Save your thumb.
We discovered how, prior to European settlers, these mountains, covered by steep slopes and rhododendron thickets, were home to a wild and diverse population of plants and animals.
I go out in the woods foraging, mostly with young people, to introduce them into grazing concepts.
Have you all ever eaten ramps? Yeah. They're stout.
Eating like a whole bunch of garlic.
Really strong
Really
garlic.
strong.
And the kids would play tricks. Oh gosh, we had one guy up there that he'd bring them ramps in before. This is in the spring of the year when it's cool. He'd take his, throw out a 10 or 15 or 20 of them things close to a radiator and take his foot like that and mash them, then kick them under the radiator and go sit down. And the teacher come in and great day in the morning. I mean, she used to have to change rooms.
We learned how the Native American tribes who were here before us lived in harmony with the landscape, and how their knowledge trickled down and found its way into the traditions of European settlers.
There's records and maps that give where the Indians lived, their names, and what they owned. The farm that joined us, a mile upstream, there was an Indian woman by the name of Betsy Buffington. She lived there in the 1830s before she was removed on the Trail of Tears. They built fish traps down on our farm, and they hunted it, and they gathered nuts and greens and stuff off of it.
Times women would put the seeds, like the corn seeds, they would put those in their mouth. They would exchange, put their DNA. They would imprint their DNA in that seed before it was planted. And more importantly than just putting their DNA in that seed before they planted it, they would have the prayerful thought and make some promises.
Early Appalachian settlers were subsistent farmers, growing food for their families in hollers and mountainsides where they lived.
The family has been on that farm since it was since the farm became a farm. The farm was a wilderness. When Sam Bell purchased 300 acres, that was in 1865, and he came in there as the pioneer.
Life was rugged and required people to have many talents, from hunting, homesteading, foraging, and food preservation.
It's the way of life in the mountains. You found a spring, and that's where you built your house. Chopped down the trees, and most of your old cabins was 16 by 20. That was small enough you could lift the logs. And then about 6 foot below your spring, you would have your spring house, a little building, 6 by 8, and the water run underneath. Then if you had a gallon of milk or something, if it was full, it would sink down and stand on its own. But if you used half of it, it'd tend to float, so you'd lay your rock on top of it, or set the rock underneath it. Or like if you had butter or a bowl of something shallow, put your rock in the water up 2 inches down, and set your butter on that, and then it wouldn't the water get in it.
Families and communities depended on one another in order to survive and thrive.
I grew up in a 9-room farmhouse, which is unusual for that period. And in my family, ancient uncles, my grandfather had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. By the time I came along, they was all gone, married and gone, had their own family going. So that my grandfather, my grandmother, and my mother, and a foster sister, if you could call that, we all lived together.
Children learned and worked alongside the adults in their lives.
I started work in orchards, and I initially worked for my grandfather, then I worked for my uncle, then I worked for some other people, and until I started in business for myself when I was 19 years old. And each and every one influenced me in some capacity.
Everyone had a job to do, and the passing along of skills and information was essential for sustaining the farms and orchard that supported them.
It was rugged, and sort of mountain land. We had to farm with a horse. It was too steep for a tractor, which we didn't have a tractor, but it's too steep for a tractor. So we farmed with a horse all the time.
Our conversations gave us insight about how, as time has passed and lives and communities have become more modern, the lifestyle and daily lives of rural Appalachians have also changed.
When I was little, there weren't houses all over the mountains.
Yes.
There weren't big roads jagging across the mountains. It looked more like home, you know. Now, everywhere you look, somebody's built a big house and painted it an oddball color so it sticks out of the mountains like a sore thumb, and those people aren't even there. That was one of the things that really aggravates me is I have to look at that house 365 days a year. They're only living in it like 2 months.
But still, it is through a strong connection to food and landscape that Appalachian culture persists.
You know, when you grow all your own food, most of your time is spent, you know, either planting it or tending your garden or preparing the vegetables. And so that was how we interacted, was I would go and I would sit on the front porch with my sisters, and we'd sit on the glider, and she'd put a big piece of newspaper in our laps, and she'd pile on these beans that had strings in them. So we would sit on the porch and string the beans and chat and talk and visit with the neighbors that walked down the street. And then we would go in and cook them together. So it was like, you know, I can't separate the time with my grandmother from the time that we had preparing food and the time that we had eating it.
Do you think eating locally grown food is important?
I think it's very important, especially for our local farmers. It just, and I think you should eat stuff that comes from your area, just financially, like I said, to help out the farmers, and plus fresh grown fruit and vegetables are just, you know, they're the best.
Chefs have brought traditionally Southern ingredients and Appalachian flavors to restaurant menus, and strong local food movement has taken root.
Jamie Ager at Hickory Nut kind of encouraged us to explore selling our product locally and at the tailgate market. So
we are so lucky to be here and in this movement and all, and at our age, you know, because we've been in sheep for 40 years. We bought sheep when we first got married, and never anticipated this.
Today in urban Asheville and its surrounding areas, the Appalachian region has a reputation for being rich with food, culture, and traditions. Over the past 30 years, Asheville has emerged as a city known for restaurants that cook with local seasonal foods and can be grown here in Appalachia.
And so I would read, for example, about a medium rare duck breast. Well, we were raising ducks at the restaurant. Two of my kitchen help had a little farm, so we were serving medium rare duck breasts, you know, probably one of the first restaurants in America to do that. And, you know, went out in the yard and killed them ourselves and plucked them and all of that. So, you know, I was doing things like that. I was working with local materials, foraging, collecting wild mushrooms, reading about what the famous chefs in Europe were doing, and then going in there and, you know, kind of making it up in my own kitchen.
This movement depends on the passing down of skills and information from generation to generation. Kids these days don't seem to be following these mountain traditions as much as they used to.
You know, one thing that I get really down and out over, I go to a lot of county clubs and give presentations, lectures. It's bad when you go to a bee meeting and all you see is bald-headed and gray-headed men. You don't see many young people getting into it. And I hope that some of you will maybe become a beekeeper.
But there is a small but growing economy of young farmers working the land and sharing these values with their communities through connections to restaurants, farmers markets, food pantries, and schools. Through listening to these stories, we become a part of the important cycle of passing on of information from elders to the younger generation. We appreciate you sharing and have enjoyed listening. By collecting and sharing these stories in our community, we hope to contribute preservation of Appalachian heritage like those who have before us.
I have an older brother that's 10 years older than me, Michael. And I called Michael just Saturday and I said, Michael, did Mommy ever sing to you? And he said, only one song that I ever remember her singing to me. And I said, what song is that? And he said, Turalura Lura. I can sing a little bit of it if I can remember the words. Over in Killarney, many years ago, my mother sang this song to me in tones so sweet and low. Just a simple little ditty in her dear old Irish way. And I'd give the world if she could sing that song to me today. Turalura lura, turalura lie, turalura lura, hush, now don't you cry. Turalura lura, turalura lie, turalura lura, it's an Irish lullaby.